I more meant, what's it like? Mick had lost any anger or academic tone to his voice and was once again in a far more relaxed mood. Like, was there school? Sports? Girls? This fucking nerd right here. The chirps and caws that came out of Binko's mouth had almost perfect analogs in English. Would skip school every chance he got to play in the arcade. Hey man, school is boring, Tense rebutted, in an obviously sarcastic tone. And simulated orbital mech drops are fun. Hold up. Mick pulled the stogie that had been in his mouth the entire time out and pointed it back and forth between Tens and Binko. His voice had gone from relaxed to incredibly excited. You had my curiosity with Space Arcade, but now you have my attention with simulated orbital mech drops. The Gardens of Deathworlders, Part 9. If you don't mind me asking a more personal question. Mia Corva's head was tilted slightly down and to the side, so she could look at Sarah while the pair walked and talked. Depends on what the question is, Sarah replied in a neutral but pleasant tone. It's about your hair. Mia Corva tilted her head a bit more to look at the mass of bright red curls that had been simply tied back into a ponytail. Oh. Ooh. Sarah's voice held a hint of relief as she glanced up. If it's just about my hair, then go ahead. The color is called ginger, by the way, despite the radically different hairstyles. And Mia Corva's dyed purple highlights. Sarah couldn't see much of a difference between the red of her own hair and the red of the Quiztar's hair. If anything, it was the style of the taller woman's hair that caught Sarah's attention. One side of Mia Corva's head was shaved, the other side wore intricate cornrows, and the top was fashioned into a swooping pompadour that flowed into a long braid. What the human woman could not see, and the Quiztar could, were the different ways their hair interacted with UV light. Is ginger the Mai as well? Mia Corva asked while almost perfectly matching the way Sarah had said the word ginger. I was going to ask what dye you use for your hair, because I love how it absorbs. I believe you referred to that color love dye. Sarah countered with a confused and slightly offended expression. No. This is my actual hair color. This is just how it grows. Really? The reply sounded genuinely shocked. I have met a few Nishnab who have changed their skin, eye, or hair color with genetic augments. But I was unsure if the people of Earth had developed similar genetic engineering. I mean, Sarah started to get more confused as to where these questions were leading, and concerned with how much she should share. We do have gene modding. It's just not very common anymore. But when I said this is my natural hair color, I meant it. It's a rare and recessive gene, but about 2% of humans have ginger hair like this. And Scotland has the highest concentration of that gene. Huh. Mia almost sounded disappointed by that. But do you know of hair dyes that are that color? Oh. Realizing the reason why she was being asked, Sarah continued with a much more excited tone. Yeah, of course. Quite a few, actually. There's even a bunch that glow under a black light, too. I'll bet Mick's Fabs could even make us some. Now, that would be lovely. The Quiztar's freckles lit up slightly at that. Speaking of, we will be entering the amenities sections in just a moment. I can show you where I get my hair done, and we can check to see if your clothing order is ready. As Mia Corva took Sarah on her own personal tour of the ship, the Scotswoman was starting to realize what this ship actually was. The past 30 minutes they spent walking through the officer's habitation section was filled with questions and explanations regarding the various essential services the section had to offer. With food, medical equipment stores, and even a few dedicated relaxation areas, Sarah couldn't think of any other amenities a military vessel would need. After having spent the past 2 years on Gibraltar Station, the amount of resources dedicated to comfort already impressed the human. However, as the pair finished passing through a relatively short connecting corridor and crossed the threshold into a new area, Sarah was suddenly taking in far more sights than she had expected. As I mentioned before, we are a support ship as well as a command vessel, Mia Corva commented to the human who had suddenly stopped, walking forward. Yeah. The astonishment in her voice was obvious. But I didn't think that meant you brought a whole city with you. Even from her relative vantage point at the top of a short but wide staircase leading to the plaza below, Sarah was having trouble taking it all in. In every direction around her, from floor to ceiling and horizon to horizon, stood a mixed-use micro-cityscape reminiscent of London city centre. From what Mia had told her earlier, she knew the ship had sections even larger than a New Dawn. However, she didn't realize how much more opulent and built-up it would be. Off in the distance, and just above the horizon of the inwardly curved deck, she thought she could see trees. There are normally over 100,000 people who crew this vessel, and 70% work in support roles, the Azure woman explained to the stunned human. At full capacity, the amenities here are capable of providing services for nearly 1 million people, in addition to the crew. We could, at least in theory, support a fleet almost double the size of the one we currently operate. So, this is basically a colony station, but covered in guns and armor? Sarah asked after a moment of processing that information and taking in more of her surroundings. That would be a very simple way of putting it. Yes. Mia Corva nodded slightly and looked around for a moment to try to experience the same awe Sarah was. This ship could also be described as a self-sustaining mobile fortress city with enough guns, as you put it. Once again, she almost perfectly mimicked the way Sarah would say the word gun to crack open a planet, and enough armor that it would take a similarly powerful ship to actually threaten us. Yeah, got a pub? Sarah asked the first question that came to her mind. Over 100? I think. Mia brought her hand up to her chin and glanced off into space while trying to remember how many dedicated intoxication establishments there actually were. There are at least 100 dedicated facilities. However, I believe less than half would be open as our deployment is technically over and the rest of the fleet are returning to their ports of call. Well then, Sarah's voice suddenly became much more grounded. Why don't you and I grab a pint before we go shopping? The Quiztar wasn't exactly sure how the Admiral would feel about her getting intoxicated on the job, especially this early in the day. However, she also didn't want to offend the human. Sure, we can do that. Would you prefer a larger establishment or something a bit less public? Got one with balcony seats? Sarah was starting to sound quite a bit more excited than Mia Corva had expected, as she gazed up at the few buildings, which reached all the way to the ceiling, far above their heads. Oh, I think I know the perfect spot. Mia said with a wink. Follow me. Walking down the stairs and towards the open plaza that served as a crossroads, Sarah was almost surprised not to see people packed shoulder to shoulder as they passed each other. On most of the UNE-controlled stations, population density and the design principles were such that having personal space while walking around was often impossible. Here, however, each person or group of passers-by had such ample room that accidentally running into another person would have required gross negligence by both parties. There were even various kiosks and aesthetic features which interrupt the paths, but not the flow of people. Their casual walk through the dispersed flow was short, yet the pair took up a slow pace, so Sarah could fully take in her surroundings. Though the density in some of the architectural choices vaguely reminded her of the most built-up areas of London's city centre, the massive holographic advertisements scattered about were more reminiscent of Times Square or Tokyo. The three-dimensional projections created such a dazzling light show that the human was completely enthralled. Through the gaps in the dancing colors, Sarah could even make out what looked like walking paths extending from, and occasionally stretching between, the building that extended far above her. As distracted as Sarah was, she didn't see that Mia Corva had taken out her tablet and started typing out a message somewhere between a reservation request and a warning. The pair continued walking for only a few minutes before turning to go down a hallway that almost looked like a back alley. The somewhat poorly lit corridor was just wide enough for the both of them to walk side by side, with a small space separating them. Arriving at a junction, they turned a corner to see a large, four-armed bear-like creature wearing armor that reminded the human of a caricature of a Viking. Sarah froze in place at the sight of what she immediately considered to be a dangerous creature. However, Mia simply greeted the creature as she would with any other friendly acquaintance. "Hey, Jarby. How are ya?" The Quiztar greeted the high-cough bouncer with a friendly wave. "Hey there, Mia. I'm good enough." The deep, almost growling voice of the bear caught Sarah by surprise, as she was still locked in place. "Starting to miss the forest, though. I got your message and set up the delivery bot." "Wonderful." There was a cheerful note in Mia's voice that heavily contrasted against the grumble of the bear. As she turned back to Sarah, there was a quite excited smile on her face, and her freckles were even faintly glowing. "The long dive is set to double standard gravity, so it may be a good idea to take off some of your weight accommodations before we enter. The bot here will bring anything you give it back to your room safely and securely." Sarah hesitated for a moment. Though the pants she was wearing were around 15 kg, they were well supported by a comfortable pair of suspenders, and she didn't want to strip down to the skin-tight leggings she was wearing as underwear. Her jacket, however, weighed over 30 kg, and her undershirt was far more appropriate for the public. "Yeah, sure." She finally conceded as she cautiously approached the bear and bot while taking off her jacket. "I would ask you to disarm as well, since this is an intoxication establishment." The depth of the growls caught Sarah off guard, and she jumped slightly despite the translation in her earpiece implying a far more compassionate, if exhausted, tone. "However, the last time I asked a human to disarm, it took about 20 minutes for him to remove all of his weapons. Just please be responsible." The growls had almost turned into laughs as the bear said the last part. "Is tens even allowed in here anymore?" Mia laughed as Sarah looked on somewhat confused. "Yeah, but he's not allowed back in after he jumps." Garby joined in with the laughter. That's his cut off now. Admiral's orders. The two taller beings were now fully cracking up as Sarah folded up her jacket and placed it on the bot. "E fucking what?" Sarah asked in utter confusion, while adjusting her suspenders into a more comfortable position. The bear had folded over on itself with laughter. Two lower arms braced its knees, one upper arm hanging loose in the air, and the other was braced against Mia Corva's shoulder. The pair were laughing, far too hard to form a coherent response. You'll see the translator picked up through the cackling, as the pair of non-humans slowly regained control over themselves. The ding from an elevator arriving helped them calm their hysterics. "Have fun, you two," the bear said with an almost pleasant growl. Turning to look Sarah in the eye, he added, "And if you do take the long dive, just be sure to call out before you reach the bottom. Gotta give people below you a heads up." Before Sarah could ask for an explanation, the doors to the elevator had opened, and the High Koth had stepped to the side to allow them passage. With their way clear, Mia quickly guided Sarah in and pressed the topmost button on the large console next to the door. Though the lift had ample space for the pair to stand quite a distance apart, the Quastar seemed to be hovering next to the human. The quickness of the ride, paired with dampened acceleration forces, made Sarah unsure of how far they were traveling. When she tried to ask her tour guide for details on their destination, the only response she got was that she would see. Before long, the doors were once again opened, and the pair had finally arrived at their destination. What Sarah now saw in front of her was both not at all what she expected from an alien bar, and somehow exactly what she expected from an alien bar. Rather than the relatively clean, though quite diverse, aesthetic of the ship so far, this place was more reminiscent of a sleazy pub in Govan. The wall, floor, and ceiling panels all had a light, wood-like veneer, which was complemented by the extensive use of wood furniture. Even the long, circular bar counter looked to be made from a single massive slab of lumber similar to dark oak. The slightly dim lighting, the mishmash of various forms of wall art, and the subtle smell of lingering smoke made the human feel right at home. Though there were plenty of technological items Sarah couldn't immediately identify, they all seemed to perfectly match the aesthetic. Walking forward into the antechamber of the long room, Sarah was greeted by a wall of sounds and smells she hadn't initially sensed from the elevator. The faint odor of alcoholic beverages was mixing with lingering smoke in a way that was both sharp and oddly sweet. Neither the slow, heavy bass lines nor the fast, polyrhythmic overtones of the music being played would overpower nearby voices. However, a person would need to shout to be heard from across the room. As Mia guided Sarah towards the round bar, a mass of chitinous tentacles half submerged in a tank of water in the middle of the circle turned towards them. "Oh no, not another one." As the massive eyes of the armored octopus-like being fell on Sarah, its voice sounded like gargling water, deep chirps, and high-pitched clicks. However, the strange noises came through Sarah's translator with a pleasantly amused tone. "Don't you read the bulletins, Tsar?" Mia Corva chided in an equally amused tone. "I don't even read my own messages. Why would I read the bulletins?" The gurgling sound coming from the tank came through as laughter in Sarah's translator. Someone was bound to tell me anyway. "Tsar," Mia sounded almost disappointed. "Please read the message I just sent you. It's very important."